Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into one of the most precisely engineered, quietly suffocating, and almost aggressively documented working worlds in American history. The daily life of a 1950s secretary. Not the cheerful sitcom version with the bouncy ponytail and the winking at the camera. Not the plucky girl Friday who solves the murder by Act 3. The real one. The version where the hem was measured, the foundation had to match your neck exactly, and the coffee order was your problem to memorize and never ever get wrong. If methodically absurd, historically precise, quietly jaw-dropping history is your idea of a good night, take a second to like and subscribe, but only if the mood genuinely strikes you. And to whoever requested a slow, deadpan tour of the 1950s secretarial rulebook, excellent taste, faintly alarming, and much appreciated. You can stay anonymous, but I hope you're tucked in somewhere very comfortable tonight, because the women in this story rarely were. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. There's always a 3 a.m. happening somewhere. Maybe it's the insomnia. Maybe it's the existential dread. Hard to say. Kill the overhead light, get a fan going for some soft static, and tuck the blanket in around you, because we're about to walk into a world where your posture, your hosiery, and the exact angle of your telephone receiver were all, technically, someone else's business. Have you ever wondered what it felt like to show up to work knowing that the wrong shade of nail polish could be a genuine professional incident? What happened when 2 million women ran the offices of corporate America and still couldn't hang up the phone first? How did you call in sick when the actual reason was a word you weren't allowed to say out loud? Could you survive a job where getting married was a resignation letter? Did you know coffee was a skill, a memorized, graded, never-to-be-repeated wrong skill? The gloves? And what exactly is a 2-letter footnote at the bottom of a letter that proves someone else wrote the whole thing? Congratulations. The year is 1955, the city is New York, and you have just woken up into it. Your alarm went off at 6. The hem check starts the moment you leave the building. Good luck. You are awake before the sun, and already there are rules. Before you can leave the apartment, you must assemble yourself according to a code you were never handed in writing but somehow know completely. The stockings go on first, flesh-toned, inspected at the knee and the heel for the smallest run. A run is not a small thing. A run is a problem that follows you all day. Then the skirt, which must fall no more than 2 inches above the knee, and the test for that is not standing up. The test is sitting down. The blouse next, then the jacket, then the shoes, closed-toe heels between 1 and 2.5 inches, because anything lower reads as casual and anything higher reads as something nobody writes down but everybody understands. The shoes match the handbag matches the belt. The belt is not decorative. None of this is decorative. You are assembling a professional argument, and the argument has to be airtight before 8:30. Then the face, which is its own separate discipline, the lipstick, the powder, the careful arithmetic of what counts as too much, and which deserves, and will get, its own attention. For now, you simply build it the way you build the rest of yourself this morning, precisely, quickly, and without appearing to have tried. The whole wardrobe, 3 or 4 skirt suits, the blouses, the shoes, the handbags, runs you somewhere between $150 and $200. Your annual salary is roughly $3,200. You do the math in November, and then you try not to think about it again until spring, when the white blouses need replacing. Macy's has a section for you. They've called it the Career Girl section, which is the kind of name that is almost encouraging until you remember you are required to shop here. Now, the gloves. White for spring and summer, dark leather for fall and winter. You put them on before you leave the building. You take them off the moment you arrive at the office. The gloves exist entirely in transit, traveling back and forth each day with nothing to do except confirm that you understand the rules about gloves. A calfer in any other century would at least use them for warmth. You use them for a 12-minute subway ride and then fold them into your purse next to the spare stockings you carry because, again, a run is a problem. The most sought-after secretaries in the country are the ones the firms call Gibbs girls, trained at a school strict enough to post a staff member at the exits to turn back anyone leaving without a hat and gloves. Not remind, turn back. You are dressing, this morning, to a standard someone like that would recognize on sight. Marjorie, at the exit desk on East 50th Street, holds a clipboard she never actually writes on. She looks at your hands, she looks at your head. She gives you a nod that is brief, exact, and entirely without warmth, and waves you through. On the days she doesn't wave you through, she simply stands there, and that is enough. You leave for the office assembled and correct, which is the most you can say for Tuesday morning. The stockings haven't run yet. The foundation matches the neck. The heels are 1 3/4 inches, which is exactly the kind of decision that takes 10 minutes to make and that no one will notice if you get it right. You stand at the mirror with a tube of lipstick, and this is not a choice you are making. In most offices, a bare face is not a personal style. It is an absence. Notice the way an absence of stockings would be noticed. The shade is narrow, reds and pinks in a moderate range, nothing too dark, nothing too pale, both of which invite comment from people who consider it their job to comment. You apply it carefully because you will be asked, silently, to account for it. The face you build now is the face that goes on record. The foundation goes on first. Max Factor pancake, which sounds like a breakfast item and costs like a recurring bill. The shade has to match your neck precisely, not approximately, not close enough precisely, because several etiquette manuals have taken the time to warn you specifically about this, which means enough women got it wrong often enough that someone felt the problem warranted a chapter. You blend carefully at the jaw. The jaw is the jurisdiction. Eyeshadow is out, the entire decade. Eyeshadow is considered theatrical, which is a word they use to mean inappropriate, without having to explain why inappropriate. You can rouge your cheeks in a quantity a nun would call modest. You can powder. You can define your brows if you do it in a way that looks like you didn't. The line between groomed and theatrical is not written down anywhere specific, which is convenient for the people enforcing it. The lipstick itself isn't a colour, it's a credential. A secretary in a Manhattan firm in 1955 with a bare face reads the same as a secretary who forgot her shoes, technically present, visibly incomplete. Doris, the office manager at a midtown insurance company, keeps a spare tube in her drawer. Not for herself. She offers it the way a conductor hands a musician a replacement bow, wordlessly, in full view of everyone, with the expectation that you understand what is being communicated. The nail polish follows its own calendar. There is an acceptable shade for a Tuesday afternoon. It isn't written on a Tuesday. It exists as accumulated consensus, the same way a town knows which neighbour you don't wave at. Reds that are too red move into theatrical. Nudes that are too nude read as unfinished. You are aiming for a colour that says I am aware of myself without saying anything further. The nails must be intact. A chipped nail on a Wednesday is a small but legible failure, and the office has excellent reading comprehension. The math becomes uncomfortable around the second week of the month. Your required cosmetics, the pancake, the lipstick, the powder, the rouge, the setting spray, run another few dollars a month on top of a wardrobe that already costs nearly a month's salary before you've typed a single letter. The face is not provided. The face is your overhead. You are, in a very practical sense, paying a monthly subscription fee to be considered professionally appropriate, and the platform keeps changing its terms. Now, the hair. It should be clean, smooth, and impeccably controlled. Anything that moves unpredictably, a curl that escapes, a wave that catches light in the wrong direction, registers as a distraction, and you are not supposed to be a distraction. You are supposed to be a surface across which the office day moves smoothly. A French twist is safe. A chignon is safe. Hair below the collar is acceptable if pinned. Hair below the collar and unpinned is technically still allowed and also somehow not. The whole construction takes between 40 and 70 minutes, depending on the curl pattern you were born with and how cooperative it's being this morning. You do this before commute. You do it in whatever light your bathroom has. You walk out the door looking, by design, like someone who didn't spend 40 minutes on it. The goal is invisible effort. The proof of skill is that it doesn't look like skill. It just looks like you. You move on to the foundation, and here the rule becomes strangely precise. The shade must match your neck, not your wrist, not the back of your hand, your neck, and several etiquette manuals of the era flag this exact point as though it were a moral hazard. You blend it down past the jaw and check the line where face meets throat in the light by the window. Mascara goes on, and powder both standard issue. The eyeshadow stays in the drawer, because eyeshadow before dark is considered theatrical, and the office is not a theatre. Lipstick last. A barefaced secretary arriving at her desk is, according to the actual written literature of this period, as notable as one who arrived without stockings, not unprofessional, not underdressed. Notable, the word they used, which carries a specific social weight, the kind where everyone sees but no one says anything directly and the silence does the work. You apply it without a mirror, because you've done this enough times that your hand knows the shape of your own mouth. You press your lips together once. You are credentialed. The stockings have their own chapter. Flesh-toned, no runs, sheer enough to look like nothing and expensive enough to feel like something. The Secretary's Handbook by Taintor and Monroe specifies flesh-toned hosiery without runs as a distinct line item, placed between heel height and hemline, as though the three form a unified moral position on what a woman's legs should communicate in a professional context. They do, basically. The position is visible but absent, present but uncomplicated. The heels are between 1 and 2.5 inches, closed toe. This is not optional in the way that most things described as not optional are actually slightly optional. This is not optional. You own 2 pairs in rotation, one black, one brown, and you bought them at the Career Girl section at Macy's, which exists specifically for you, which is less a compliment than it sounds when you consider that the section exists because your employer has opinions about your shoes. This is where the hemline enters. Skirts no more than 2 inches above the knee measured while seated. Someone measured this. A person with a ruler sat down in a chair and decided that 2 inches was the line between professional and something else, and wrote it in a book, and the book was taken seriously. Sylvia from the steno pool learns this on her 3rd day when a senior secretary named Phyllis sits across from her in the break room, tilts her head slightly to one side, slow, deliberate, and unhurried, and says nothing at all. Just the tilt. Sylvia's skirt is 2.25 inches above the knee. Phyllis knows. Phyllis always knows. The full wardrobe, 3 or 4 skirt suits, blouses to rotate, the shoes, the handbags, one for spring and one for fall, runs about $150 to $200 in 1955. Your median salary is somewhere around $3,200 a year, which works out to roughly $62 a week before deductions. The wardrobe is nearly a full month of that. The wardrobe does not care. It has a cost, and the cost is fixed, and you bought it before you typed a single letter because you could not walk through the door without it. It's basically a uniform with no uniform allowance, and if you've worn the grey suit twice this week already, you've noticed, and so has Phyllis. Then there are the gloves, white for spring and summer, dark leather for fall and winter, worn for the commute and removed on arrival. You carry them in your left hand after you take them off, folded, while you sign in. They serve no function in the office. They are entirely for the train. The gloves are a declaration, made to strangers on the platform, that you are a person with a destination and standards about how you travel to it. You take them off the moment you arrive and tuck them into your handbag and do not think about them again until 5 o'clock. Your hair has already been dealt with, set the night before or pinned this morning into something that will hold for 9 hours. The rule is that it stays out of your face while you work, and that hair touching the collar is acceptable only if it is pinned, a distinction issued in actual company memos by people who measured collars. Then the perfume. One careful touch, because the directive is that scent should be subtle and not pronounced. Nobody defines the line between subtle and pronounced. That line lives entirely inside your supervisor's nose. The hair memo exists because someone somewhere made a decision that loose hair signals a personality. Not a bad personality, necessarily. Just one that hasn't been fully managed yet. So you pin it. You set it. You lacquer it into a shape that communicates readiness without communicating effort, which is the whole project, really. Looking composed costs the same as a second job and must appear to cost nothing at all. The desk you arrive at is a steel case. Grey-green, metal, and faintly institutional, with a shallow top drawer that sticks slightly in cold weather. It sits directly outside Mr. Harrison's office, which has a door and a window and a rubber plant nobody waters except you. Your desk doesn't have a door. Your desk doesn't have a window. Your desk has a chair with a cushion that has slowly formed an impression of you over 18 months, like a very patient witness. The size difference between your desk and his is not accidental. The size difference between your desk and his is the memo you never received but understood on day one. A Calfa, that is, Dolores, the senior secretary on the East Wing who has worked here since 1947 and keeps a small mirror in her left-hand drawer, walks past your station each morning and sets a single paperclip on your blotter without breaking stride. It's her system. She doesn't explain it. You learn eventually that it means the carbon paper supply is low and you should put in a requisition before 9. You do. You always do. The paperclip has never been wrong. Now, the typewriter. The IBM executive model sits on the typing return to your right, a machine that cost the firm approximately $375 and has strong opinions about your error rate. The standard is 60 words per minute, minimum, with no more than 2 mistakes per page, 2, on a page that might run 400 words, which means you are permitted to be wrong roughly once every 200 attempts, which is basically a hit rate your surgeon would be proud of, except your surgeon is allowed to use a pencil. You get a small abrasive eraser and, if you've assembled your carbon set correctly, 4 layers of paper to scrape through one at a time while the correction dries and the clock keeps moving. The abrasive eraser is still on your desk. The phone rings. You answer by the second ring, never the first, which reads as desperate, never the third, which reads as indifferent, and you say, "Mr. Harrison's office, Miss Evans speaking." One breath. In practice, this means you've been mentally rehearsing the sentence since you sat down, which is less pathetic than it sounds and more pathetic than it looks. You never hang up first, no matter how long the caller rambles, no matter how rude, no matter what. The caller hangs up, then you hang up. The phone has no concept of your feelings about this arrangement, and the phone is correct not to have one. At some point before 10, Mr. Harrison will want coffee. You know he takes it with 1 sugar and no cream because you learned this on your 3rd day and wrote it on the inside cover of your stenopad in very small handwriting and then memorized it and then destroyed the evidence. Every executive in this building has a coffee order embedded in someone's memory like a fragment. Black for Mr. Calloway. 2 sugars. Splash of cream for Mr. Calloway. Pierce, who will not say thank you but will notice if it's wrong. You carry the cup. You set it down without comment. The cup is correct. You reach for your gloves on the way out, because in most white-collar offices you do not commute bare-handed. White for spring and summer, darker leather for fall and winter. A calendar your hands are expected to keep. You will wear them on the train, on the sidewalk, in the elevator, and then you will take them off the moment you arrive, which means the gloves exist almost entirely for the journey to the place where you remove them. You pull them on anyway. The hat goes on too, and the day has not started yet. At the Catherine Gibbs School they enforce exactly this. Not a sign, not a posted policy. A person standing at the door, looking at your head. Leave without your hat and gloves and you are turned around, sent back up, and expected to return correctly assembled. The wardrobe itself is its own checklist. 3 or 4 skirt suits, blouses to rotate. Closed-toe heels, 1 to 2.5 inches, documented in the Secretary's Handbook by Taintor and Monroe as though heel height were a technical specification, which in this world it is. Skirts no more than 2 inches above the knee when seated. The measurement is taken while seated, because someone thought about this very carefully and decided the seated position was the moment of greatest structural risk. Macy's and Marshall Fields have both installed dedicated career girl sections by the mid-1950s, which suggests the market for compliant office attire is enormous, which it is, because you have no choice. The full wardrobe runs about $150 to $200. Your annual salary is somewhere around $3,200. You do the math on the train, under your white gloves. Naomi Prescott, the wardrobe consultant who makes a small Tuesday circuit of the 3rd floor at Hartwell and Crane, brisk, silent, and quietly merciless, carries a clipboard she never writes on. She pauses near your desk, glances at your hem, glances at your shoes, and moves on without saying anything. Not saying anything is how she says something. You learn this in the first week. The clipboard is decorative. The silence is the note. Now, the hosiery. Flesh-toned. No runs. This is not a suggestion. A run in your stocking is the kind of thing that gets noticed in the same category as a visible ink stain or an unanswered telephone. You keep a spare pair in your desk drawer, behind the shorthand notebooks, next to the bottle of clear nail polish you use to stop a run from spreading, which is the 1955 version of a patch update, and works about as well. You learn the rest of the rules without being told, because not being told is the primary delivery mechanism for most of them. You finish your face at the vanity at 6:15, checking it in poor light the way an engineer checks a seam. You blend. You check. You put on the hat. You put on the gloves. You lock the door. The commute takes 35 minutes. Nobody speaks to you. The gloves make your hands feel like they belong to a slightly more formal version of yourself, which is the version required at the destination. You take them off in the elevator, fold them into your handbag, and by the time the doors open on the 14th floor, you are Miss Calloway's office, Miss Prescott speaking, assembled and ready, the gloves already gone and the day already begun. You do the arithmetic on your closet, because the closet is part of the job. A proper working wardrobe in the middle of the decade means 3 or 4 skirt suits, several blouses, the right shoes, the right handbags, and it costs somewhere between $150 and $200, against a median secretary's salary that is close to a full month of gross pay spent before you have typed a single useful word. The department stores understand this completely. They have built sections for exactly you, with a name on the door. Macy's calls it the Career Girl department. Marshall Field's has one too. The racks are organized by occasion, interview, day, and something vaguely labeled versatile, which means it can go from typing pool to the occasional lunch if the lunch isn't anywhere impressive. A saleswoman named Gloria, whose hair doesn't move and whose smile suggests she has quoted the same paragraph 6,000 times, tells you that a good navy suit is an investment. She says the word investment the way a dentist says this won't hurt. You buy the navy suit. You buy the blouse that goes with it. You do not buy the second blouse, because you are doing math in your head the entire time. You run the numbers at the counter while Gloria waits. Median salary in 1955 is roughly $62 a week before taxes. The suit is $35. A pair of acceptable heels, closed toe, 1 to 2.5 inches, not a millimetre more, runs another 8 to 12 depending on the brand. A handbag that doesn't read as shabby next to your boss's mahogany desk is another 6 or 7. 3 blouses at $4 each. You are now most of the way through a month's net pay and you haven't bought stockings yet. Stockings are a recurring cost. Stockings are, in their way, a subscription service you never agreed to. The handbook specifies the hemline. Skirts no more than 2 inches above the knee, measured while seated, which means someone has thought about this from a sitting angle and made a ruling. The handbook is the Secretary's Handbook by Taintor and Monroe, and it is less a guide and more a document that has achieved a kind of ambient authority. Nobody holds it up and reads from it. It doesn't need to be read aloud. It simply exists, and its conclusions have been absorbed into the atmosphere of every front office between here and the loop. The hemline is not a preference. The hemline is a measurement. Of course, the wardrobe only works if the rest of the presentation matches it. Margaret Holloway, the senior secretary on the 14th floor at Brennan & Associates, has been at that desk 9 years and has the whole thing solved. She maintains 3 suits in rotation, presses her blouses at home on Sunday evenings, and keeps a spare pair of flesh-toned stockings in the middle drawer with the quiet, practiced, and unhurried competence of a field medic keeping a tourniquet ready. She does not discuss this system. She simply operates it. The suits rotate so smoothly that the partners have never once registered that she doesn't own more of them. This is the whole point of the system. You are supposed to look effortless. The effort is your problem. The shoes have a logic too. Closed toe because open toe reads as beach adjacent, and the office is not a beach. Heels because flat shoes communicate something nobody has defined but everyone has agreed they don't want communicated. The heel height is specific enough that a woman who guesses wrong by a 1/4 inch isn't wrong in any way anyone would name out loud. She's just slightly off. The slightly off quality hovers over her desk all morning. It doesn't announce itself. It's just present. And then there's the handbag, which is not a bag. It is a second surface you carry everywhere that is expected to be clean, structured, and not visibly bulging. If it bulges, something is wrong with your organization, which means something is wrong with you. The handbag should close completely. Properly organized, it could rent itself out as a small judgmental filing cabinet. The handbag should match the shoes within a range that requires judgment, not instructions. Nobody writes down what match within reason means. This is, in its way, a test you take every morning with no answer key and no grade, only the ambient sense that you either passed or you didn't. You are not born knowing all of this. You are trained, and the most famous place to be trained is a secretarial school where the rules of the office are simply the rules of the building. You take typing and shorthand, yes, but also business English, telephone etiquette, executive psychology, and a course the school calls poise and personality. You may not leave the building without a hat and gloves. You know this because a staff member stands near the exit, and her entire function in that moment is to turn you back if you forget. The school is Catherine Gibbs, and attending it is the difference between being a secretary and being a Gibbs girl. The distinction matters more than it should. A Gibbs girl commands roughly $10 to $15 more per week than a comparable hire from a general business college, which isn't nothing when your entire salary is $62. She also gets placed faster, into better offices, closer to the more important bosses. Catherine Gibbs herself died in 1934, but the school runs the decade like she's still watching from a second-floor window. She might as well be. The exit checkpoint isn't a metaphor. A staff member physically positions herself near the door every morning and every afternoon. Clipboard optional, judgment mandatory. You approach with your hat on and your gloves fitted. If you've forgotten one or both, she redirects you with the calm efficiency of someone who has done this 400 times and finds your expression about as surprising as rain. The school calls this professional standards. It's basically a TSA checkpoint, except the prohibited item is your own bare head, and there's no appeals process. Tuition runs about $800 a year in 1955, which is roughly a quarter of what you'll earn in your first year of working. You consider this an investment. The school considers it a bargain. You learn to type to 60 words per minute, then 70, then more. You take Greg shorthand until the symbols arrive before the words do, until you're writing a sentence before the man speaking it has finished deciding where it ends. The best Gibbs girls take dictation at over 100 words per minute. Your hand moves the way a court reporter's moves, automatic, detached, and faintly inhuman, like a separate person who happens to live in your wrist. A woman named Ruth Simmons sits 2 desks to your left in the typing room. She has a technique for keeping her posture exactly upright for 6 hours that involves a very slight forward tilt she refuses to explain. She types without looking at her hands. She corrects an error mid-word without breaking rhythm, which shouldn't be physically possible. Ruth will graduate top of her cohort. She will go to work at a law firm on Madison Avenue where she will spend 9 years drafting letters her boss signs, and an additional 4 drafting letters she signs in his name, the notation at the bottom reading JFH RS. His initials large, hers lowercase, which is more or less the entire story. The poise and personality course meets twice a week. You learn to enter a room without announcing yourself with noise. You learn to sit in a straight-back chair without touching the back of it, which turns out to be a skill with its own muscle memory, like balancing something invisible on your spine. You learn the correct handshake, firm, brief, no follow-through, and the correct way to accept a compliment, which is to thank the person once and then redirect the conversation. The course has no exam. You are graded on whether the instructor looks at you differently by week 8. Most people cannot tell you what that means until it has already happened. By the time you finish, you know the greeting cadence in your sleep. You know the coffee orders, the carbon paper protocol, the telephone rules down to the second ring. You know how to walk into an office that belongs to someone else and make it run as though it belongs to you, invisibly, which is what they hired you to do. The hat and gloves get put away when you graduate. The standard they stood for does not. You sit beside his desk with a notebook on your knee, and he begins to talk, and your hand is expected to keep up. The system is Greg shorthand, taught in business schools across the country, a private alphabet of loops and slashes that turns speech into something you can outrun. A competent secretary takes dictation at 80 to 100 words a minute. A very good one passes 120. He does not slow down for you, and he does not repeat himself, so the words exist now only in your notebook and in the small panic between your ear and your pencil. Gregg shorthand was invented in 1888 by John Robert Gregg, who wanted a system that flowed like cursive rather than stabbing at angles like a Morse operator in distress. By the 1950s, it's everywhere. In business schools, in night courses at the YWCA, in the curriculum of every Catherine Gibbs location in the country. You learned it the way you learned a second language, by drilling until it stopped being a system and became a reflex. The loops are vowels, the slashes are consonants. The tiny lifted stroke is a word you've written 1,000 times before. Your hand knows without asking. Let's talk about what 80 words a minute actually feels like. It's not fast, technically. A practice speaker talks at about 150 words a minute in normal conversation. At 80, you're still trailing him. You compensate with abbreviations, standard ones, personal ones, hybrids you've developed over 3 years of doing exactly this, and the notebook fills in a handwriting that looks, to anyone else, like a seismograph reading from a nervous city. Nobody else can transcribe your notes. This is, quietly, your leverage. It does not pay extra. Beatrice Okafor, Senior Secretary, 14 floors up, calm, exact, and faintly terrifying. The kind of woman who keeps a spare pencil in her hair without it ever looking messy, can take dictation at 117 words a minute without breaking her posture. She tested it once, with a stopwatch on the desk between them, because her boss didn't believe her. He believed her after. He did not apologize for doubting. The stopwatch went back in his drawer. The best secretaries at the top. Gibbs tier. Clear 120 words per minute. That's basically a court reporter. Except court reporters get breaks and your boss does not believe in breaks as a concept. When the dictation ends, you excuse yourself back to your desk, and then you transcribe, from those loops and slashes back into full English, typed cleanly, with margins correct and no more than 2 errors per page. The notebook doesn't help you if you wait too long. The loops fade in meaning. A session from 3 hours ago starts to look like a decorative border on a wedding invitation. You transcribe the same day. You always transcribe the same day. This is where the carbon sets come in. Every letter needs an original and at least one copy, sometimes 3. One for the file, one for the department, one for a person who will never read it but whose copy is required anyway. You feed the carbon paper in by hand, pressing the sheets into alignment before the first keystroke. A typo on page 1 means scraping the error from 4 layers individually: original, first carbon, second carbon, third carbon, with a small abrasive eraser, working lightly enough to not hole the paper, firmly enough to actually remove the letter. It takes longer than you'd expect. The carbon smears if you rush. You don't rush. You feed a clean sheet into the typewriter, and the standard you are held to has a number attached. A good secretary types at least 60 words a minute with no more than 2 errors per page, and both halves of that sentence are watching you. The machine itself is a heavy, expensive thing. The IBM Executive, which cost more new than some people's monthly rent and produces types so clean that it leaves your mistakes nowhere to hide. Speed alone is not enough. Accuracy alone is not enough. You are asked all day for both at once. The IBM Executive isn't just a typewriter. It's a proportional spacing machine, which means each letter takes up exactly as much room as it deserves. A narrow I gets less space than a wide M, and the result looks printed rather than typed. This is wonderful for the finished document. It is less wonderful for you, because the finished document now looks like it came off a press, which means a single transposed letter sits in the middle of an otherwise flawless page like a man who has arrived at a funeral in tennis whites, technically present, catastrophically wrong, and impossible to look away from. The machine makes you look more professional. It also makes you look worse when you fail. It has opinions about your performance, and it expresses them in 12-point type. 2 errors per page, in practice, means 1 typo per half page, which, at 60 words a minute across an 8-hour day with normal correspondence load, is a tolerance so thin it makes dental floss look generous. The correction process from segment 8 still applies. You stop, you find the eraser, you scrape the mistake out of the original, and then, if there's a carbon set involved, you repeat the process on each layer individually. A 3-copy carbon set with 1 transposed letter costs you roughly 4 minutes of your day. Do it 15 times, and you've lost an hour. The math is not sympathetic. A senior typist at Metropolitan Life named Dolores Finch keeps a small tin of spare erasers in her left desk drawer. She opens it every morning to count them. Not because she's eccentric, well, not only because she's eccentric, but because running out mid-afternoon is the kind of logistical failure that cascades. She has counted erasers every workday since 1953. The tin is roughly the size of a sardine can. It holds exactly 11. The typing pool, which is the entry-level tier below a personal secretary posting, runs at 75 to 80 decibels sustained. The roar of a busy diner, held at a constant pitch for 7 hours with a 45-minute break. You don't get used to it. You get used to not getting used to it, which is a different thing. The standard there is a fixed letter quota every hour, held to the same accuracy, meaning the decibel level and the error tolerance exist simultaneously and without apology, like two bad neighbors who've worked out a schedule. Gibbs girls, the graduates of the Catherine Gibbs Secretarial Schools, which by the mid-1950s operated in Boston, New York, Providence, and Chicago, arrive already trained to the standard rather than being broken in by it. Tuition runs about $800 a year in 1955, which is not a casual expense. The school teaches typing, shorthand, business correspondence, and office conduct, and it does so with the brisk certainty of an institution that has never once entertained the possibility that it might be wrong. Graduates are the elite tier. Firms ask for them specifically. The IBM executive does not intimidate a Gibbs girl. It is simply the instrument she has already learned. The pay for all of this is lower than what the man down the hall earns for comparable work, and the gap sits there year after year, documented and entirely unbothered. The IBM executive types that fact just as cleanly as it types anything else. You need 3 copies of this letter, and there is no machine in the corner that will make them for you. You make them yourself, by hand, before the typewriter ever sees a word. You assemble what the office simply calls a carbon set: a sheet of paper, a sheet of carbon, another sheet of paper, another carbon, stacked in the correct order with the correct sides facing the correct way. Get the carbon backward, and you will type a perfect mirror image letter onto the back of your original. Then you roll the whole fragile sandwich into the machine and hope you assembled it right. The carbon sheet itself is thin and unforgiving, coated on one side in a waxy ink that transfers under pressure. It smudges if you look at it too directly. It leaves a bruise-coloured smear on your fingers, your cuff, and occasionally your left cheekbone, in ways that are difficult to explain to anyone arriving late. The carbon has no interest in your schedule. It transfers exactly what you give it, including the typos. Glenda, 2 desks down, can build a 4-layer carbon set in the time it takes you to find the carbon, square it once against the desk, and slide it in without a single sheet shifting. She does not explain how. You suspect there is no how. There is only Glenda. This is where the small abrasive eraser enters the picture, not the pink one. The gritty grey one, which feels like sandpaper that gave up on being sandpaper. When you make an error, you don't correct 1 sheet, you correct 4. You lift the carbon layers carefully, one at a time, and scrape each copy clean with the eraser, working from the original down through the stack. The carbon smudges as you lift it. The copy paper tears if you press too hard. The whole operation has the focused serenity of diffusing something. You do not have a better option yet. A secretary in Dallas named Bette Nesmith Graham is, right around now, mixing one in her kitchen, but that's a story for a few minutes from now, and it does you no good today. Today you have the eraser, and the eraser does not improve with familiarity. Of course, you don't have liquid paper yet. This is the early part of the decade. You have the eraser, and you have patience, and you have the specific frustration of finishing a correction, only to realize the carbon has shifted a millimeter during the process, and your retyped letter now sits visibly off-axis from the rest of the line. The document notices. You notice. Mr. Harrison will notice. The finished letter, corrected or not, gets a notation at the bottom left. 2 sets of initials, his in capitals, yours in lowercase, separated by a slash. JFH, Mies. His name, your work. The whole arrangement compressed into 5 characters, filed and mailed. A senior secretary can draft that letter herself, sign his name to it, and send it out without Mr. Harrison ever reading a word of it. His initials are on the document. Her lowercase letters are underneath them. The notation is a very tidy summary of the decade. You hit the wrong key, and now you have a problem that lives in 4 layers at once. There is no delete. The correction is physical. You take a small abrasive eraser to the top sheet, scraping the ink away without tearing the paper, and then you do it again, more carefully, to each carbon copy beneath it, because the mistake was faithfully reproduced on all of them. One secretary in Dallas got so tired of this that she mixed white tempera paint in her kitchen and carried it to work in a nail polish bottle. You do not know yet that you are watching the birth of liquid paper. Bette Nesmith Graham does not announce it. She simply sets the small bottle on her desk at a Dallas bank in 1951, dabs the brush onto the offending letter, blows lightly, and retypes over the dry surface. A colleague leans over, asks what that is. Bet says something vague and territorial. The bottle disappears back into her drawer. She spends the next several years quietly refining the formula in her kitchen, using a blender and her son's school supplies as R&D, which is the kind of origin story that would get an entire TED Talk now, except the talk would also need to explain why she had to invent it at all. The eraser is still the standard method for most of the decade. It has a gritty, abrasive, and faintly aggressive texture, the kind of surface that is confident it belongs there. You hold the paper taut with your left hand and scrape with your right, light pressure, circular motion, because too much force tears through and then you're building a carbon set from scratch and the afternoon is gone. The error on the carbon copies comes out a slightly different shade, cleaner. You note this. You say nothing. You retype. By mid-morning, there's a smudge of carbon riding the side of your hand, shaped, if you squint, like a small disapproving country. One export, no coastline, a flag the colour of a bruise. The typing pool runs at 75 to 80 decibels sustained, about the noise level of a busy restaurant, except it's the same restaurant every day and nobody ever brings you anything. 30 women at 30 metal desks, each one smaller than the desk in the office it supports. The IBM executive typewriter costs $375, approximately what a used car costs, and it does not apologize for errors. The Metropolitan Life quota never lets up. You are aware of the count. The count is always aware of you. The notation at the bottom of the finish page is 2 sets of initials with a slash between them. JFH on the left, that's your boss, James F. Harrison, who dictated the letter from an armchair while you took shorthand at 90 words per minute, translated it into prose on the way back to your desk, and typed it clean on the first try except for one small incident near the third paragraph, MS on the right. That's you. You drafted it. You corrected it. You signed his name to it with a consistency of penmanship he can no longer quite achieve himself. The letter goes out. His name travels. Yours stays at the bottom, below the fold, 2 lowercase letters that the recipient will never read. Edith Marsh, a senior secretary at a midtown insurance firm, has a system. She keeps a small tin of typing eraser shields in her top left drawer, thin metal plates with rectangular cutouts in various sizes, so she can scrape a correction without ghosting the surrounding text. She has used the same tin since 1953. The tin is dented on one corner where it fell from the desk. She straightened the corner with a letter opener and did not mention it to anyone. Edith's corrections are invisible. The letters she writes in Mr. Ellison's name are, by general consensus, better than the ones he writes himself. Mr. Ellison does not disagree with this assessment. He simply does not make it out loud. By 1958, Bet Nesmith Graham is selling liquid paper to offices across Texas under the name Mistakeout. The name will change. The formula will improve. In 1979, Gillette buys the company for $47.5 million. The abrasive eraser does not take this personally. It is still in the drawer. You are seated very deliberately just outside his private office, and the placement is not an accident of furniture. Your desk is the gate. People who want to reach him must reach you first, which makes you both an access point and a small public signal of how important he is. The desk itself is metal framed and smaller than his, and the size difference is not because you need less room. It is because the room is a map, and the map is supposed to show, at a glance, exactly who outranks whom. The standard issue model is a steel case or Shorewalker in battleship grey, with shallow drawers and a pull-out typing shelf that jabs your knee if you forget it's there. It is organised, aligned, and faintly anxious, within an inch of its life. Incoming correspondence on the left. Outgoing on the right. A single notepad. Aligned to the corner. Your shorthand notebook open at the current page, waiting. The desk doesn't have opinions about this arrangement. It simply is the arrangement, the same way a hostess stand is the restaurant, except you are not allowed to leave at closing time. The drawers hold a geography of their own, carbons in the deep one, spare stockings behind them, a clean collar pin, a roll of stamps, and a small mirror angled so you can see his door open a half-second before you hear it. You did not arrange it this way because anyone told you to. You arranged it this way because the desk is the 1 square yard of the building that answers to you. Standing up has its own rule. In formal offices, and most offices consider themselves formal, you stand when he enters the room, not when a client enters, not when another executive passes through, when he does. A visitor named Mr. Albright from the Cincinnati branch might walk past your desk twice an hour, and you remain seated. But the moment Mr. Harrison's door opens and he steps out to ask where his 11 o'clock went, you are on your feet before he finishes the question. You have done this so many times that your chair now rolls back on its own as you rise, anticipating you. The chair has learned. You have, in a sense, trained each other. Addressing him is also not casual. He is Mr. Harrison. He has been Mr. Harrison since your first morning and will remain Mr. Harrison until one of you leaves the building for the last time. He calls you Carol. This asymmetry is not commented upon. The room simply contains it, the way a room contains a temperature difference without explaining thermodynamics. The spatial logic of the outer office is total. The smaller desk positions you as both gatekeeper and announcement. The caller who arrives and sees you seated knows, immediately, that he has not yet arrived, that there is one more door, one more moment of permission to be granted. You are the threshold with good posture. The room makes you a piece of furniture that can take shorthand, which is either an insult or a job description, and in 1957, the line between those two things is roughly the width of a carbon sheet. You address him as Mr. followed by his last name, always, in every circumstance, and there is no version of the day where this slips into something friendlier without his explicit permission. Being invited to use his first name is a small event, a mark of favour, and even then you may decline to use it in front of other staff because the room is watching. In some of the more formal offices you are also expected to stand when he enters, the way one stands for something. He walks in, you rise. This is simply how the morning works. He calls you by your first name, you call him Mr. Whitfield. This is not a negotiation. It is a thermostat setting. Everyone in the building understands the temperature of the room without checking. The gap between what you call each other is not personal. It is architectural. You could be at this job for 11 years and it would still be Miss Callahan from you and still be Marion from him, and neither of you would find that strange enough to mention. Of course, standing has its own protocol. You don't lurch upright like something startled. You rise smoothly, papers still in hand if necessary, the way a person rises who has been expecting exactly this to happen, because you have been. A secretary named Eleanor Bask at a Wall Street firm described the whole motion as something you eventually stopped noticing you were doing, the way you stopped noticing your breathing. Her words, not a compliment. Personal errands aren't optional either. They aren't listed in any job description you were handed. They exist in the same category as knowing how he takes his coffee, the unwritten addendum, the fine print that materializes after you've already signed. You pick up his dry cleaning. You send flowers to his wife on their anniversary, signed with his name, in handwriting that is yours. You select the card. You address the envelope. The wife thanks him that evening. He accepts this gracefully. A secretary named Helen Ingram at a midtown law firm kept a small index card in her top left drawer, not a client list, not a billing record. It tracked the birthdays of her boss's wife, his mother, his 2 daughters, and the date he preferred to stop buying Christmas gifts so the packages arrived before the 23rd. The card had been updated every January since 1953. Mr. Alderman had never seen it. The system ran without him, the way good infrastructure tends to. The 2-letter notation at the bottom of the letter, JRA, Hi, tells anyone who reads it carefully that Helen wrote it. The capitals are Mr. Alderman. The lowercase is Helen. Helen chose the words, softened the 3rd paragraph, and caught the wrong date before the letter went out. Nobody reads it carefully. And yet none of this accumulates into leverage. You can't trade 11 years of knowing exactly how things work for a title that reflects it. The wage gap the Women's Bureau tracked in 1955 and again in 1957 sits at about $20 to $30 a week. You at 65, the man doing adjacent work at 85, and no federal law requires anyone to explain the difference. There won't be one until 1964. You are, in the meantime, simply an efficient and professional employee with excellent shorthand. The formality isn't cruelty, exactly. It's furniture, fixed, deliberate, and load-bearing. It holds the room in a particular shape, and the shape is the point. Mr. Whitfield walks in. You rise. The room knows what it is. You all continue. The telephone rings, and a clock you cannot see has already started. You are expected to answer by the 2nd ring, every time, and to identify the office and yourself in a single smooth breath. His office, your name, all of it before the caller has said a word. The phrasing is fixed, something close to Mr. Harrison's office, Miss Evans speaking, delivered the same way every time so that it sounds effortless. It is not effortless. It is a small performance you give several hundred times a day, and the only review you get is silence when you do it right. The hold rule is 90 seconds, not 2 minutes, not a rough estimate. 90 seconds, after which you return to the caller, report that the line is still engaged, and ask if they'd like to continue holding. You do this because the manual says so, and because nobody wants to be the secretary who left a vice president of something suspended in silence long enough to reconsider the relationship. The phone itself has opinions about this. The receiver has a correct angle, not a comfortable angle, a correct one, which are two different things, and the phone is not interested in which one you prefer. Let's talk about the hold. There's a woman at a midtown firm named Dorothy Crane who has timed herself. She counts to 88 and picks back up, because the last 2 seconds are for emergencies. Dorothy has been doing this since 1953. The counting happens underneath everything else, underneath the shorthand, the carbon sets, the coffee order for the 11 o'clock meeting, the way some people hum without knowing they're humming. The number lives in her body now. She doesn't need a watch. You can never hang up first. This is not a suggestion. The caller ends the call. You wait. You wait through the pause after everything has been said, through the brief social hovering where neither party is sure if it's over, and then you wait a little more, because hanging up on a senior partner by accident is the kind of event that gets a name. The phone doesn't care that your ear is tired. The phone has a very clear sense of who matters more in this transaction, and it is not you. The other thing the manual covers is tone. Not what you say, how you say it. The voice has to be warm, level, and faintly tireless, all at once. Warm but not familiar, helpful but not eager, efficient but not rushed. This is basically a Yelp review you have to perform in real time, at scale, for hours, without access to the 5-star option. And if the caller is rude, if he cuts you off, or mispronounces your name, or asks you to hold and then forgets you exist for 4 full minutes, you stay warm and helpful and efficient, because there is no supervisor to escalate to, and the caller is, in a very real sense, forever. Meanwhile, across town, the typing pool at Metropolitan Life is running at 75 to 80 decibels. That's a busy restaurant. That's the ambient noise of somewhere people are having fun, sustained over an 8-hour shift, 5 days a week, for the duration of a career. You don't work in the typing pool anymore. You have a desk of your own, outside a specific door. This is considered a promotion. You still answer by the second ring. A senior secretary named Gloria Marsh at a firm on Broad Street has answered the phone so many times that she no longer hears herself say it. Mr. Calloway's office, Miss Marsh speaking. She told someone once that she found out what her own voice sounded like by calling her own desk from a payphone on the corner. She listened to herself say it. Then she walked back upstairs and said it again. A caller is rude to you now, and the rules about what you may do in response are very short. You may not hang up first. Under any circumstances, the guidance distributed by the telephone company itself instructs you to stay calm and to never be the one who ends the call, no matter what is being said into your ear. You may also not leave a caller waiting on hold for more than 90 seconds without coming back to check on them, which means even your silences are scheduled. The other person can be anything. You are required to be pleasant. The caller doesn't know your name. He knows the girl. He addresses you as the girl, the way someone might address a vending machine, with the expectation of output and no particular regard for how the machine is doing. You note his name, the nature of his call, and the time, in that order, on the pink message slip that has its own designated corner of your desk. The pink slip is waiting for you before the call ends. It was always going to be pink. You do all of it at once. You soothe him, you reroute him, you promise a callback you'll personally have to chase, and you keep your voice at the register that reads as helpful rather than sedated. One eye on the clock for the 90-second hold mark. A call center worker today does roughly the same job, except she has a supervisor, a break schedule, a union in some states, and the theoretical option of escalating. You have the pink slip. You have the rule about never hanging up first. That is the entire toolkit. Meanwhile, Mr. Harrison is in his office with the door closed, and there's a man from the Chicago office on hold, and another call is coming in on the second line, and the light is blinking in the particular impatient way that all second-line lights have in common. You answer it. Mr. Harrison's office, Miss Evans speaking. The phrase leaves your mouth at the precise angle of a sentence that has been said so many times it no longer feels like language. It's closer to weather. It's just something that happens. The Bell System's own guidance materials from the early 1950s described the ideal telephone voice as warm but efficient, which is the verbal equivalent of asking someone to be simultaneously a radiator and a stopwatch. The voice must smile. This is literal. The materials tell you to actually smile while you speak because listeners can hear it, which is true, and which means you are physically performing warmth into a Bakelite receiver at 9 in the morning for a man who opened with, "Put me through. I'm in a hurry." You smile. The receiver doesn't thank you. A secretary named Vera Simmons at a midtown insurance firm in 1956, calm, methodical, and quietly furious, developed the specific habit of placing one finger flat on the desktop every time a caller was rude to her. One finger per incident. On a bad day, she'd reach her thumb. She never mentioned this to anyone. It wasn't a system. It was a census. The rude caller is only one feature of the telephone's overall personality. The phone also rings when your boss is out, and you must explain his absence without revealing where he is, even if you know or what he is doing, even if you can guess. You say he's unavailable, and you take the message. You take the message with the tone of someone for whom this is completely normal, because it is. The phone rings when someone's wife calls, and the rules about how to handle a wife calling are their own chapter, separate from the chapter about clients and separate again from the chapter about personal calls, which you are discouraged from receiving, though no one says this directly. The phone just always seems to ring at an inconvenient moment when yours comes in. The phone has noticed this too and is not sorry. The guidance specifies you may never close a call with less than a complete sentence. Goodbye alone is acceptable. Bye is not. The contraction is apparently the place where professionalism goes to die, at least according to 1954. You say, "Goodbye, mister," and you wait for the click on his end, and then you hang up, in that order, always in that order, because you are Miss Evans and Mr. Harrison's office is a specific kind of place, and you know where the boundary is even when the caller doesn't. The pink slip goes in the tray. The second line is still blinking. You pick it up. You make the coffee, because in most offices the coffee is yours to make, and if you are the most junior secretary it is yours alone. The percolator holds 10 or 20 cups and lives somewhere near your desk, and your real task is not the brewing, it is the memory. You are expected to know how every executive in the office takes his coffee, cream or sugar or black, and to know it without being told more than once. The cup is ceramic, not paper, which means you also wash it. Resentment of this duty is understood to be a career risk. What without being told more than once means in practice is exact. Mr. Calloway takes his black, no sugar, but the black is a specific black. Not the first pour of the pot, not the last, and definitely not from the bottom layer where the grounds have been sitting since 8 o'clock developing opinions. Mr. Fenwick takes 2 sugars and a splash of cream. But splash is doing a lot of work in that sentence, and you learned exactly how much work it was doing on your second Tuesday. There are 4 executives on your floor, 4 coffee orders, no index card. The index card would be an admission of something. The percolator has its own personality by this point. It runs a little hot on Mondays. It spits. It is temperamental, territorial, and reliably contrary. You know its temperament the way you know a difficult colleague, not fondly, but thoroughly. The percolator does not thank you for this knowledge, neither does anyone else. It's a chrome Farberware that holds 20 cups and takes 11 minutes to come to the boil, which means the first real decision of your day is made at 4 minutes past 8 before you've even peeled off your gloves. Start it now and it's ready when he arrives. Start it late and you spend the rest of the morning apologizing with your posture. You measure the grounds by eye. You have never once measured them any other way. The machine gurgles, then mutters, then produces a sound like a small, polite round of applause, which is how you know it's done. A cup carried wrong is a minor catastrophe with a very long memory. Too weak and you've insulted him. Too strong and you've ambushed him. Lukewarm and you've simply confessed, in front of everyone, that you forgot. The window in which a cup of office coffee counts as correct is roughly the width of a held breath, and you have learned to hit it from 40 feet away, across a full typing floor, in 2-inch heels, without letting so much as a drop reach the saucer, which must also, somehow, arrive dry. This is the first test of every morning. Whether you remembered, whether the cup is clean, whether the temperature landed, whether you understood that black for Mr. Calloway means something far more specific than the word itself technically allows. You pass the test by being invisible. You fail it by being noticed. The cup is back on his desk by 8:45. He doesn't look up. That is the good outcome. He needs a gift bought for his wife, and this, somehow, is your job. The list of things that count as normal extensions of your position is long and grows quietly. Selecting flowers for occasions you have no part in, booking his personal travel, collecting his dry cleaning, choosing a birthday present for a woman you have never met, and signing the card in a hand that approximates his sentiment. None of this is typing. None of this is in any description of the work you trained for. It arrives anyway, folded into the day as though it had always belonged there. What this actually requires is constant, invisible planning. The dry cleaning alone demands advanced planning, knowing which cleaner he uses, whether they press the collar flat or folded, how long before Thursday you need to drop it. Mr. Calloway's wife is allergic to carnations. You know this. Nobody told you formally. You absorbed it the way you absorb all useful information in this office, by paying very close attention and never letting on that you're doing so. The gift situation is its own category. You're sent to Saks or Bonwit Teller with a dollar amount and a vague description of the occasion, something nice, not too personal. You're expected to return with something appropriate, wrapped and ready for presentation, without it looking like a secretary chose it. It should look like he chose it. Thoughtfully. A man who noticed. You are, in this moment, a personal shopper, a gift wrapping station, and a fiction maintenance service simultaneously. There's no line item for any of it. There's no overtime attached to it. When you collect his theatre tickets from the box office on your lunch break, that's your lunch break gone. When you track down a specific bottle of scotch because he mentioned it once in October and his birthday is Friday, that's an errand that took 45 minutes and will appear nowhere in any record of your professional contributions. The bottle will, however, appear on his credenza, looking as though it materialized there through some ambient goodwill in the atmosphere. Miss Delvecchio on the 14th floor has been doing this for 9 years. She keeps a small leather notebook in her top drawer, not a work notebook, not a stenopad, her own. In it, his wife's ring size, his daughter's school play dates, the name of the restaurant where he proposed, because it came up once, and she wrote it down. She pages through it on Monday mornings with the efficiency of someone diffusing something. None of this makes it onto your performance review. The review has categories for typing speed, telephone manner, filing accuracy, and dictation. It does not have a category for remembered his mother-in-law hates chrysanthemums or saved his anniversary. The review would look considerably different if it did. You might be running the place. He is paid more than you for work that overlaps with yours, and not $1 of his salary covers a dry cleaning run. Nobody put the errands in a report at all. The errands have no number, so officially they were never done. There's no rule that covers any of it, and nothing that names it arrives until 1964. For now, the errand is just the errand. It lands on your desk with the same flat normalcy as the mail. You add it to the morning's list, between the 9 a.m. call you need to place and the letters waiting for carbon sets. It fits, because you've made room. You always make room. He'll need the gift by Thursday. You already know the size. He hands you the routine mail and does not ask to see your replies, and over time you realize what that means. You are drafting the answers yourself, writing them in his voice, signing his name at the bottom, and sending them out into the world without his ever reading them. The only trace that you existed in the letter is a small notation at the bottom left, his initials in capitals, yours in lowercase beneath, a compressed record of who actually wrote it. The power in this is real, even if no one will ever say so out loud. You decide what he is understood to have said. The notation is 2 letters over 2 letters. JFH, Miss. His name takes 3 letters. Yours takes 2. This is also, somehow, the point. The letter goes to a client in Cincinnati or a supplier in Detroit or a lawyer's office 3 blocks away, and everyone who receives it reads it as his. His reasoning, his tone, his decision. You wrote it at your smaller desk, on your smaller typewriter, in the 40 minutes between his 10 a.m. phone call and his 1 a.m. meeting. And then you signed his name the way he signs his name, which you have memorized the way you've memorized how he takes his coffee. What this actually requires is a kind of mind reading. You have to know his opinion on things he has never mentioned. You have to know how formal he is with a client he's met twice versus a client he's met 20 times. You have to know when he hedges and when he doesn't. Because the wrong one in writing is a problem that lands on your desk, not his. Senior secretaries at firms like Sullivan and Cromwell are doing this daily by the mid-1950s, composing, signing, mailing, and the etiquette guides treat it as a natural extension of the role, which it is, in the same way that a ventriloquist and a puppet are a natural extension of each other. The senior secretary, Mrs. Parrish, the 1-2 offices down, who has been here since 1947 and whose chair does not scrape when she stands, can draft, sign, and dispatch a letter so cleanly that the partner she works for occasionally refers to it in later meetings as something he wrote. He believes this. She does not correct him. She just moves on to the next letter, because there are 4 more in the stack and the afternoon mail goes out at 3. Of course, there is no extra pay for this. The notation is the acknowledgement. JFH, MS. That's the whole arrangement, compressed into 6 characters and a slash. You are not a ghostwriter. Ghostwriters get credited eventually, or at least paid. You are something the 1950s office world doesn't have a word for yet, which is convenient for everyone except you. The carbon sets are how you know the letters exist at all. Every document goes out as an original plus copies, one for the file, one for the client, sometimes a third for an internal record, and each copy is produced simultaneously, which means when you make an error, you correct it on every layer. You scrape the typo out of 4 sheets of carbon paper one at a time with a small abrasive eraser that has the soul of sandpaper and the patience of a creditor. The original first, then the copies, then you realign everything and type the correct letter in the correct space and hope the correction is invisible. It is not always invisible. The letter goes out anyway. You keep drafting the letters. The initials stay lowercase. The letters keep going to Cincinnati. You get married, and the safest thing you can do is tell no one at work. Many companies require a woman to resign the moment she weds, a policy so widespread it has a name in personnel offices, the marriage bar. The reasoning, stated plainly and without embarrassment, is that a married woman has obligations at home that make her unreliable here. So the ring goes on a chain under your blouse, where it rides warm against your sternum all day, a small piece of gold contraband running its quiet daily fraud on the personnel file, or it stays home in a drawer. Either way, you keep coming to the desk every morning as though nothing has changed. Something has changed. You simply cannot afford to say what. Sociologist Claudia Goldin documents this in more than 50% of large American firms as late as 1951. AT&T applies it. Procter & Gamble applies it. Major New York law firms apply it with the particular confidence of institutions that have never once questioned themselves. The policy is plain, confident, and entirely unembarrassed. The reasoning isn't hidden. It's printed in hiring guidelines, stated in interviews, discussed in trade publications, as though it's a reasonable position about logistics, which it is, in the same way a closed door is a reasonable position about physics. New York City's own civil service guidelines let department heads refuse women who are pregnant or have children under school age. This is 1957. The rule isn't buried in fine print. It's just the rule, and the form has a box for it, and the box gets checked, and that's the form doing what forms do when no one is watching forms closely enough. What happens when someone finds out isn't a scandal. Nothing so dramatic. A supervisor named Mr. Aldrich notices the slight change in your face on a Monday, or the way you move past the coat rack differently, or he simply overhears something in the break room. He calls you in. The conversation is short. You're given 2 weeks, which is considered generous. Your replacement starts the following Monday. She's 23, single, and has no particular intention of marrying soon, which is the only qualification that matters at this particular moment. She sits at your desk. The desk doesn't notice. The women who hide it successfully develop a secondary set of skills nobody asked them to develop. You learn to remove the chain before you dress each morning so there's no outline under the blouse. You learn which co-workers ask questions and which ones aren't looking. A secretary named Carol on the 14th floor of a midtown insurance firm does this for 3 years, through a pregnancy that she conceals until month 5 by wearing a girdle 2 sizes too small, which, given the era's views on foundational garments, reads as nothing more than excellent posture. She's not the exception, she's the method, and yet the numbers keep growing. By 1950, about 7 million women work as secretaries or stenographers in the United States. By 1960, that number is 2.3 million. The marriage bar doesn't stop this. It just means a significant portion of the workforce is managing 2 full-time jobs, one at the desk and one staying invisible, while earning a salary the Women's Bureau clocks at roughly $65 a week, against a male administrative assistant's $85 to $95. The gap doesn't have a formal explanation. The gap is just the gap, and the gap has very good posture. No federal protection exists for any of this. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 is still years away, and sexual discrimination in hiring has no legal framework yet, which means the marriage bar isn't a violation of anything. It's just policy. The policy has letterhead. The policy sends you home with 2 weeks severance and a firm handshake from Mr. Aldrich, who will not remember your name by spring. You are pregnant, and the calendar is now counting down to the end of your employment, whether you like it or not. The expectation is simple and almost never written kindly. Once it shows, the working relationship ends. You resign, or you are quietly transferred to a role where the public cannot see you, or you are let go. And which of those happens depends largely on the mood of the people above you. In one city, the official civil service guidelines openly permit a department head to refuse a woman with a child under school age. Your future, here, has a visible deadline. Let's talk about the paperwork. There isn't much. No formal termination form, no documented cause, no conversation on the record. The reason doesn't need to be written down because no law requires it to be, and no law prevents it. You simply stop appearing on the schedule. Your chair is cleared. Your nameplate goes back to the supply room to be reissued under a new name, like a library book. A new girl starts Monday. She has good posture and doesn't show. Frances, the personnel coordinator on the 4th floor, hands you a small envelope on your last Friday. Inside is a card signed by the department. It says best wishes. Frances closes the envelope herself before she gives it to you, which means she has read it, and which also means she knows best wishes is doing a lot of diplomatic lifting for a situation with considerably more texture than that. The desk is cleaned out in under 10 minutes. Your nameplate goes back to the supply room. The IBM sits there, keys up, waiting for whoever types next. It doesn't mark the occasion. The IBM is calm, grey, and professionally indifferent to personnel matters. Of course, the official story is that you've chosen this. The word resigned goes in your file, regardless of how much choosing was involved. The form has one line for reason of departure, and condition became visible is not among the options, so resigned it is. The file will say you left voluntarily. You did not leave voluntarily. The file doesn't ask follow-up questions. New York City's civil service guidelines, still in circulation in 1957, let any department head reject an applicant who has a child under school age, not for cause, not for performance. Just for having a child of a particular age in a particular location called your home. The guideline doesn't explain itself. Guidelines of that kind don't feel they owe you an explanation. They have been working for a long time and see no reason to change. You are not unusual in this. Every woman in the steno pool has done the arithmetic. You've watched 3 colleagues in 4 years pack up the same desk drawer, shake the same hands, receive the same best wishes card with the same Frances handwriting inside. The trajectory is legible. Everyone understands it and no one says it plainly, which is its own kind of administrative achievement, a policy so thoroughly shared it doesn't need to be written anywhere. And what happens after is your business. Whether you come back, whether you find something smaller, whether you stay home, and that's the end of it. The office has moved on by Wednesday. The carbon sets still need assembling. Mr. Harrison's coffee is still 2 sugars, no cream. The phones still need answering by the 2nd ring. The work continues, unbothered, without you. The work was always going to continue without you. That was, in a way, the whole arrangement. You wake up unwell, and even being sick has a procedure. You must telephone before 8:30, and you must do it yourself, in your own voice, because having a family member call on your behalf is considered improper. For 2 days or more you will likely need a doctor's note, and there is one reason for feeling unwell that you are expected never to name directly, so you reach instead for the approved vocabulary. You say you are under the weather, you say you are not quite well, you do not say the actual word, and no one asks you to. The call itself has a script. You reach whoever answers at the office, possibly another secretary, possibly the switchboard operator, possibly a woman named Doris who writes everything down in a ledger with a mechanical pencil and has opinions about handwriting. And you say your name, your department, and that you won't be in. Firm but brief. You do not elaborate. You do not describe symptoms. You say you're not quite well and you expect to return tomorrow. The ledger notes the time of your call. Doris notes it too, mentally, with a small amount of judgment she'll share with no one except the woman at the next desk. What counts as a legitimate reason is a short list. A fever counts. A doctor's appointment counts, with documentation. A cold that has developed into something audible counts, because no one wants to hear you cough across the office. What doesn't count, officially, is harder to list, because it isn't listed anywhere. It simply operates as understood. You are under the weather. The phrase does the work of 12 others. It is a single umbrella, held at a slight angle, covering quite a lot of weather. Menstrual symptoms are not, in any formal policy document you'd be shown, listed as illegitimate. They simply aren't listed at all. The vocabulary doesn't reach that far. The word itself doesn't appear in the telephone conversation or the ledger or the follow-up comment from your supervisor. A man named Gerald who wears his watch on the inside of his wrist and has never once been asked to explain the reason for his absence. Gerald will note that you called before 8:30, which is correct, and that you returned the next day, which is expected, and the matter ends there. The matter ends there every month. It is a very efficient system. The doctor's note, if required, is its own small obstacle course. You call the doctor's office, which also has a procedure, and you explain that you need documentation of your visit for your employer. The doctor writes a note. The note says you were seen and advised to rest. It does not say why. The why, again, is covered by weather. You carry the note into Gerald, and he places it in a file folder that lives in a drawer he has never fully explained the purpose of. The note joins other notes. The drawer closes. Done? The work you didn't do yesterday hasn't waited for you. Your in tray has developed a posture, slumped, reproachful, and faintly disappointed, like a very small pile of things that expected better from you. Whatever wasn't typed yesterday needs typing today. Whatever wasn't filed is now slightly more urgent for having sat. The carbon sets you didn't assemble are sitting in a neat stack with a handwritten note on top that says urgent, which is someone else's word for your Tuesday morning. A woman named Patricia, who covered your phone while you were out, has written 3 messages on pink slips in handwriting that is deliberately legible, which is the passive-aggressive version of helpful. You sit down. The chair is yours. The desk is the smaller one. The stack is real. You roll a fresh sheet of paper into the typewriter, align the carbon, and begin. You were sick yesterday in the approved manner, and now you are well in the approved manner, and neither of these is particularly about how you actually feel. The under the weather is behind you. The ledger has already moved on. You have somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour for lunch, and the clock on the back end of it matters more than the clock on the front. Arriving late in the morning is noticed, but returning late from lunch is treated as the greater offence, because your empty chair in the afternoon causes visible disruption right when the office is busiest. So you eat with one eye on the time, calculating the walk back, the elevator, the last stretch to your desk. The break is real. It is also, in every practical sense, still part of the job you are timing yourself against. Let's talk about where you go. You don't have a cafeteria. Some offices have a lunchroom, a narrow room with a folding table and a smell that is part coffee, part radiator, part despair, but many don't. So you go down to the street, which in Midtown Manhattan means navigating a sidewalk that is absolutely not designed for someone in a pencil skirt and 2-inch closed-toe heels. You move in small, efficient, and faintly military strides. You've been doing this long enough that it looks effortless. It is not effortless. The lunch itself costs somewhere between 35 and 60 cents at a counter diner, which is fine, because the alternative is a proper sit-down restaurant, where a club sandwich and a Coca-Cola can run close to $1.25. You do that on Fridays, occasionally, when the week has been bad enough to justify it. The calculation is not about money exactly. It's about what $1.25 buys you in terms of being treated like a person who sits at a table rather than perches at a counter. Sometimes it's worth it. Often it isn't. Margaret at the counter already knows what you're having. She's been there since 6. She works faster than the IBM executive on a good day, and she has never once written anything down. You like her for this. You feel a professional solidarity you can't quite name. This is where the watching gets specific. You're not imagining it. The return to the office is noted in a way the departure is not. Your boss may not track when you leave. He will notice when you are not back. The logic here is unarguable if you are him. Your departure is his inconvenience deferred. Your absence is his inconvenience present. The phone rings when you're gone. The correspondence stacks. He has to manage himself for 45 minutes like a very senior person being asked to do something very junior. This is uncomfortable for him. Your punctual return resolves the discomfort. Your tardiness extends it. So you are back by 12:55 if lunch is at noon, or 1:55 if you took the later slot. You smooth your skirt before you sit. The skirt does not wrinkle visibly, this matters, because a visibly wrinkled skirt in the afternoon suggests you were somewhere you shouldn't have been, or doing something more vigorous than eating a tuna melt. The skirt has opinions about this too. You and the skirt have reached an understanding. Your lipstick is refreshed before you return. Not in the elevator, that's bad form, the compact out in a shared lift, but in the washroom on your floor, quickly, with the same shade you applied at 7:40 this morning. The shade doesn't change. It's not an expression of mood. It's a uniform element, and the uniform doesn't get variations on a Tuesday afternoon. You can also use lunch to do the things you can't do at your desk. The bank, the post office. A quick stop at Macy's Career Girl section to look at a blouse you've been considering, which costs $4.50, and which you will spend 3 separate lunch hours weighing before buying or not buying. Running errands on your lunch hour is efficient and expected. Running errands for your boss on your lunch hour is also efficient and also expected, and there is no additional compensation for the difference between these two activities. The time belongs to you. The task does not always. You are back at your desk by 1. The afternoon mail has arrived. The in-tray has acquired new material in your absence, which it does without apparent human involvement, like a mailbox that has developed anxiety. You do not remark on this. You pick up the first item and begin. It is payday, and you happen to know what the man down the hall makes. You earn $65 a week, and the male administrative assistant doing work that looks remarkably like yours earns $85, $90, sometimes more. This is not a secret exactly. The Labour Department's own bureau tracks the gap and publishes careful reports about it, written in language that describes the difference without ever quite asking anyone to fix it. You are not supposed to discuss your salary with the other women, which is of course precisely how the number stays where it is. You discuss it anyway, quietly. The Women's Bureau puts out its findings in 1955 and again in 1957. The findings are noted. A report is filed. The report is filed somewhere the reports go. You are still making $65. The money arrives in a small brown envelope, gummed shut, your name typed across the front by someone in payroll who does this 400 times a month and stopped reading the names years ago. It is a modest, unremarkable little envelope. It does not know that it is thinner than the identical envelope 2 desks over. The two will never be introduced, never laid side by side on a desk where it would matter. They just travel out of the same drawer every other Friday, one heavier than the other, like fraternal twins raised under very different financial circumstances. What $65 actually covers is less than you'd hope. Your rent, if you're lucky, takes the largest share. Your required wardrobe, the 3 skirt suits, the blouses, the closed-toe heels, the handbags, costs somewhere between $150 and $200 when you assembled it, which is nearly a month's pay before you typed a single letter. The gloves alone required a seasonal switchover, white for spring, dark leather for fall, not by preference but by decree. You are, in a meaningful sense, paying to show up. The math does not close. The man down the hall doesn't have a dress code. He has a suit, which he already owned, and which the office does not inspect for foundation to neck colour matching. He didn't need to consult Max Factor. He didn't need to consult anyone. He walked in and sat down and the room accepted him at face value. You arrived 45 minutes earlier, spent $11 on stockings that week, and the room accepted you at blouse value. There is no federal protection here. The Civil Rights Act won't arrive until 1964, and even then it will take another decade for anyone to legally name what happens when a man with authority behaves the way some of the men with authority behave. For now, there is no form, no office, no procedure. There is a supervisor named Henderson who stands too close when he reads over your shoulder, and there is nowhere to record that fact except your own memory. The memory is not admissible anywhere. Add it up at your desk sometime between calls. You make $65, he makes $85. You also type his letters, answer his calls by the second ring, know how he takes his coffee without ever needing to be told twice, pick up his dry cleaning on your lunch hour, which is your lunch hour, and occasionally address his wife's birthday cards in your own handwriting because his is illegible. None of that is in the job description. The job description doesn't have a second page. A senior secretary at a firm on Park Avenue can draft a letter, sign her boss's name to it, and mail it without his ever seeing the thing. At the bottom of the page, in small type, JFH, Mies, his initials, her initials, his name on the letter, her hands on every word. The notation is the whole story in 2 letters and a slash. Elsie Marsh, who handles correspondence for 3 partners at a midtown insurance company, keeps a small notebook in her desk drawer. In it she records the letters she's drafted, the calls she's placed, the filings she's completed, the problems she solved before anyone noticed they were problems. Nobody asked her to keep this notebook. She keeps it anyway, updating it in the last 5 minutes of the day with the focused, patient, and methodical precision of someone assembling evidence. She doesn't know yet what she'll do with it. She keeps it anyway. A partner makes it clear that something is expected of you that has nothing to do with shorthand, and you have almost no language for what is happening and even less recourse. There is no federal protection against this. There will not be a legal definition for it for another 2 decades. One secretary is told her transfer request will be denied unless she keeps having lunch with a particular man every Friday, and she complies for 11 months before she finally resigns. Her case is unusual only in one respect. Someone wrote it down. Most of them were never written down at all. The vocabulary simply doesn't exist yet. You can't name it, which means you can't file it, which means you can't fight it. What you can do is manage it, smile at the right angle, stay visible enough to be useful and not so visible as to attract the wrong kind of attention, and calculate, constantly, which inconveniences are survivable and which ones will cost you your job. It's a geometry problem with no correct answer, and you're expected to solve it every single day before the second ring. Let's talk about the texture of it, because it isn't always a lunch ultimatum. Sometimes it's a hand on your shoulder that stays 2 seconds longer than a hand on a shoulder should stay. Sometimes it's a comment about your hemline, not a complaint. Technically, not anything you could repeat with the words in the right order and have it sound like what it was. Mr. Carver sets a draft on your desk and says something while he does it. You file the draft. You don't file the something. There is no drawer for the something. The absence of a word does most of the work. Without a word for it, there's no category. Without a category, there's no form. Without a form, there's no one to bring it to. And the man is your boss, and also the person who decides whether your transfer goes through, which makes the only office that hears complaints the same office the complaint is about. The Women's Bureau documented your paycheck. It never documented this. Of course, some offices had a kind of informal knowledge, a shorthand passed between women the way Greg shorthand was passed in classrooms, except this one was never written on a chalkboard. A departing secretary named Vivian Pellegrino pulls a colleague aside on her last day and tells her which floor to avoid after 5 o'clock. She says it matter-of-factly, the way she'd explain which executive takes 2 sugars. The colleague nods. Neither of them says anything else about it. Vivian's desk is cleared by the following Monday. The real archive for all of this lives in the powder room, the one room in the building with no telephone, no boss, and no minutes taken. It is where the maps get drawn. Which floor, which man, which hour, passed mirror to mirror in a low voice while someone reapplies a lipstick she does not need to reapply. It is the most accurate set of records the company keeps, and the company will never know it owns it. The math of it is quiet and consistent. You are paid less than a man for the same work. You have no legal protection. You have a wardrobe that costs a month's salary to maintain. You have a desk that is physically smaller than the desk of every person with authority over you. And somewhere inside all of that structure, the carbon sets, the coffee orders, the 2-inch hemlines, the correct angle of the telephone receiver, somewhere in there, something else is also being asked of you. And it has no name, and it will not have one for another 20 years. The women who stayed developed a kind of institutional fluency that had nothing to do with typing speed. You learn to read a room the way you read a dictation, fast, accurate, and unflinching, with no errors you couldn't correct before anyone noticed. You learned which silences were safe and which ones weren't. You learned that the most dangerous moment wasn't the obvious one. It was the quiet Tuesday afternoon when nothing was wrong yet. You begin to notice that your role has a shape no one printed on your paycheck, and the management literature of the day actually has a phrase for it. You are the office wife. You remember his appointments and his preferences and his moods. You smooth his small daily frustrations. You keep his professional life running the way a household runs, minus any of the standing that the word wife is supposed to carry. The arrangement is discussed openly in the magazine's executives read. It is treated as a feature of a well-run office. You are, in effect, married to the work and to the man, with neither title nor exit. What the job actually contains by 1957 has quietly expanded for years, and nobody has updated the posting. You draft his correspondence. You manage his calendar. You remember that his wife's birthday is March 14th and that she prefers tulips over roses, because he mentioned it once in passing and you wrote it down. You pick up his dry cleaning on Thursday. You select a gift from him for his mother-in-law. You call the restaurant and make the reservation, and then call back to confirm, and then call back again because he changed his mind about the time. None of this is in the job description. The job description says typing and filing. Estelle, at the third-floor desk of a midtown insurance firm, keeps a small index card in her top drawer with a column for each of the 4 executives she supports. Name, coffee preference, parking garage, wife's name, children's names, allergies. She updates it in pencil. She has never been asked to do this. She started it because the alternative was being wrong once, and being wrong once was worse than maintaining a personal intelligence file on 4 grown men who cannot remember their own doctor's appointments. The word wife does quiet damage. A wife is owed nothing legally either, not in 1957. The domestic labour has no invoice. The anticipation has no line item. The way you read his mood from his footsteps in the corridor and have his coffee cooling to the right temperature before he reaches his chair, none of it appears on the org chart, and none of it appears on your paycheck. The man 2 floors up, doing a version of the same work with less coffee involved, is paid noticeably more. The difference is not a secret. It simply has no consequence yet. The management journals frame all of this as a compliment. The ideal secretary is described as intuitive, anticipatory, and selfless, a word that does considerable work in a professional context when the person being described is also the one making the coffee. Fortune magazine runs a profile in 1954 describing the relationship between a senior executive and his secretary as a partnership. The secretary being profiled types 95 words per minute, manages 4 phone lines, drafts half his external correspondence, and is identified in the article as Miss Hartwell. Her first name is not used. His is. The notation at the bottom of the letter reads JFH, Mies. The top half of that slash is his. The bottom half is yours. You wrote the letter. You chose the phrasing. You knew the client's name and the tone that would land because you've been handling him for 3 years and your boss has met him twice. The letter goes out under his signature. He signs it without reading it because he trusts you, which is the closest thing to a performance review you are ever going to get. And yet the work is real, and you know it, and the other secretaries know it, and in the quiet, professional calculus of the floor, everyone knows whose desk the building actually runs through. The boss knows too. He just can't say it in a way that would require him to pay you differently. So instead he says you're indispensable. He means it. Indispensable is a very convenient word for a thing you have no intention of changing. You do not have a desk outside anyone's door. You have a seat in a room full of women doing exactly what you are doing. This is the typing pool, the lowest tier of the whole hierarchy, 10 to 40 of you in a single large room turning standardized specifications into finished correspondence. The quota at one big insurance company is 45 letters an hour, and a labour study clocks the noise in these rooms at the level of a busy restaurant sustained for years. You almost never see an executive. The work comes to you on a cart, and the cart does not make conversation. 30 machines going at once does not sound like 30 machines. It sounds like one enormous insect with 30 knees, slowly working something out. The cart arrives every 40 minutes or so, pushed by a junior clerk named Darlene who has been pushing it since 7:45 and has developed a 1,000-yard stare, impressive for someone who is 22. The cart carries intake folders, and the intake folders carry handwritten drafts in various states of legibility. One of them is written in pencil, so light it's basically a suggestion. You type it anyway. You type everything anyway. 45 letters per hour means you have about 80 seconds per letter, which is the IBM executive typewriter's way of telling you that you are, in fact, a machine that also needs lunch. The IBM executive costs about $375, which is roughly what you'd pay for a used car. The used car wouldn't require you to achieve 60 words per minute with no more than 2 errors per page, but the car comparison only goes so far because at least a car goes somewhere. You stay in this room, the letters go somewhere, this is the arrangement. Carbon sets are where a single mistake gets expensive. Every document needs an original, 2 carbon sheets, and copy paper stacked in exact sequence, and if you make a mistake on page 1, you scrape it out of all 4 layers individually with a small abrasive eraser that is doing its best and knows it isn't enough. The process takes about 3 minutes per correction. The quota does not pause for corrections. The quota has never heard of corrections. 2.25. A Dallas secretary named Bette Nesmith Graham solved a version of this problem in 1951, mixing correction fluid in her kitchen and carrying it to work in a nail polish bottle. The typing pool did not benefit from this in any immediate way, but it's worth noting that the most valuable office invention of the decade came from a woman who was simply tired of scraping. Meanwhile, above you, spatially and every other way, the private secretaries are managing their bosses' calendars, drafting their correspondence, and knowing how each one takes his coffee. You don't manage anyone's calendar. Your name doesn't appear on anything you produce. The 2-letter notation at the foot of a letter, JFH, Ms., records that JF, Harrison wrote it and someone whose initials are MS, typed it. And the gap between those 2 facts is where your entire professional life currently lives. A supervisor named Mrs. Kowalski, silent, watchful, and reliably unimpressed, walks the rows twice an hour. She doesn't carry a clipboard because she doesn't need one. She has memorized output rates the way some people memorize train schedules, and her face when she stops at your station carries the specific blankness of someone who is not angry yet but is keeping a running total. You type faster. The woman to your left types faster. The room gets slightly louder, which means it has graduated from busy restaurant to the specific frequency of a busy restaurant where something has also gone wrong in the kitchen. The path out of the pool is shorthand. Greg Shorthand, specifically, a system of loops and dashes that turns spoken English into something that looks like a seismograph reading from a particularly anxious earthquake. The best stenographers take dictation at over 120 words per minute. You're working toward 80. At 80, you're eligible to test for a private desk assignment, which means a real boss, a real nameplate, and the opportunity to stand up when he enters the room. That part is not discussed during the shorthand lessons. It arrives later, with the desk. A new device arrives on his desk, and you understand immediately that it has cost you something. The dictaphone records his voice onto a belt, which means he no longer needs you sitting beside him with a notebook while he dictates. He can speak into the machine at any hour and leave you to transcribe it later, alone, from a recording. This sounds like convenience, and it is, for him. For you, it is the quiet loss of the one part of the day when you were physically inside his office, near the conversations where things were actually decided. The machine is efficient. It is also a door closing. The dictaphone belt sits on your desk in a small cardboard sleeve. You slot it into the transcription unit, put the headphones on, and press the foot pedal, which controls playback the way a sewing machine pedal controls speed, except instead of fabric, what you're stitching together is someone else's half-finished sentences at 7 in the morning. He pauses mid-thought frequently. He clears his throat directly into the microphone. Sometimes he takes a sip of something and the recording captures it in full, wet detail. You type through all of it, which is a little like being asked to transcribe a radio program where the host keeps forgetting what he was going to say. What you lose, specifically, is the room. Dictation in person meant sitting across from him while he thought out loud, pausing, reconsidering, occasionally asking you what you thought the phrasing should be, because you'd been handling his correspondence for 3 years and you knew the way he liked a refusal to sound. A dictaphone belt doesn't ask. It simply plays, and you type, and the belt has no opinion about whether the 3rd paragraph is going to land wrong with the Chicago office. You have one. Nobody cues it. Meanwhile, the machine is spreading. By the late 1950s, dictaphone and its main competitor, grey autograph are standard equipment in mid-size offices across New York, Chicago, and Detroit. The sales pitch, aimed at management, is straightforward. Executives can dictate after hours, on weekends, on the train. Productivity expands. What the pitch doesn't say is that the secretary's role quietly contracts. The gap between her desk and his office gets a little wider every year, without anyone calling a meeting about it. Marjorie Finch, a senior secretary at a shipping firm on Lower Broadway, sets the headphone volume to exactly halfway every morning before she begins. She has worked out that this is the level at which his voice is intelligible but not present, functional without being intimate. She does this without being asked, and without explaining it to anyone. It is a small piece of professional self-preservation, and she has given it no name. The dictaphone is only the beginning. The early office copier, Haloid Xerox, releases its first commercial machine in 1959, is the next thing to arrive without a meeting. Carbon sets, which you have been assembling and correcting by hand for years, begin to look temporary. The copier doesn't eliminate your job. Nothing eliminates your job, but it reroutes the parts of the job that required precision and patience, and a certain kind of practiced hand, and routes them instead through a machine that anyone can operate, including the man who previously couldn't be trusted to dial his own calls. You are still essential. The desk is still yours. The coffee is still made the right way, cream, no sugar, without being asked. But the walls of the room you occupy, the room defined by what only you can do, are moving inward, one labor-saving device at a time. The dictaphone doesn't know this. It just sits there on its little stand, its belt loaded, waiting to play someone else's voice into your ear for the rest of the morning. You take a job at a company with government contracts, and now the rules reach further than your hemline. Because the work touches classified material, you are subject to a background investigation that examines your political affiliations, your personal relationships, and the backgrounds of your own family members. The Bureau keeps files. A meeting you attended years ago for reasons that seemed harmless at the time can quietly end a security clearance and move you to a different desk without any process you are allowed to appeal. The scrutiny applied to you at this level has no equivalent among the men around you. You are watched more closely for sitting in the same chair. The form asks about your associations. It uses the word loosely. A cousin who joined a union in 1946, a college roommate who went to one meeting of something with a name that now reads badly, a neighbor who subscribed to the wrong magazine. You fill in the boxes carefully. The form doesn't ask what you remember of these people. It asks what you know, which is different. And the distinction matters in a way the form declines to explain. You sign it. The form disappears into a process you are not part of, where a folder with your name on it begins, somewhere, to quietly put on weight, fed a steady diet of other people's half-remembered Tuesdays. An investigator arrives at your mother's house one Tuesday. He sits at her kitchen table, accepts coffee, and asks about your habits, your moods, your dating history. Your mother, who has done nothing, answers everything. She thinks this is what you're supposed to do. She's probably right. The investigator takes notes in a small leather notebook, thanks her, and drives away without telling her anything about how it went. The notebook goes somewhere. You are not told where. The word unreliable does a great deal of work in this decade. It is vague, elastic, and quietly devastating. It covers communists, obviously. It also covers women who are nervous, women who are too friendly, women who have been divorced, and women who have been seen in conversation with men their employers don't recognize. Agent Kellerman, a man who has interviewed 43 secretaries this calendar year, and whose own marriage is, by all accounts, complicated, marks a box on a standardized form. The box says character suitability. He checks it. You are suitable. This time. If you are not suitable, you don't receive a letter. You are simply reassigned. New desk, different floor, no classified access. The paperwork that moves you doesn't name a reason. It doesn't have to. There's no form for appealing a form that officially doesn't exist. Your salary stays the same, which is the part management will point to if you ask why. Meanwhile, your boss, whose college transcript you typed last spring, whose letters you sign with his initials, has not been interviewed at his mother's kitchen table. His file is thinner, not because his associations are cleaner, but because the framework assumes the risk flows one direction. You're the one with access to the documents. You're also the one who can be repositioned without a meeting, a memo, or a named reason. These two facts coexist comfortably in the same building. The surveillance has texture outside of government contracts too. Large corporations in industries adjacent to defense, aerospace, telecommunications, certain chemical firms run their own informal versions. A personnel director at a company in Dayton keeps a note in the file of any secretary who attends church irregularly, which he interprets, without ever saying so aloud, as instability. A different director in Hartford flags women who ask salary questions as not a team fit. The flag isn't written down. It doesn't need to be. It lives in the director's memory, which has excellent retention for this category of information. You learn to read the temperature of a room before you speak in it. You learn which topics land quietly and which ones leave a small residue. This isn't a skill anyone teaches you. It's not in the Catherine Gibbs curriculum. It doesn't appear in the Secretary's Handbook next to the instructions about hosiery. You develop it the way you develop any professional competency, by watching what happens to the women who didn't have it yet. The background check happened once. This skill runs continuously. You walk into the personnel office to apply, and for a great many women the answer has already been decided before you sit down. If you are a black woman, the major corporate secretarial positions are, in practice, closed, and the numbers are stark enough to speak for themselves. The census of 1950 records black women as 0.3% of the country's stenographers and typists, at a time when they make up roughly 1/10 of all working women. The skills you have are not the question. The room you are standing in has rules it does not print, and it enforces them at the door. Let's talk about what the rejection looks like. It doesn't look like a rejection. The position has been filled. The position requires experience you don't quite have. The position is currently under review. The position, it turns out, was never really posted at all. Nobody signs a document that says the wrong reason. The form just moves to the next stack, and the next stack does not contain your name. The form is a small marvel of blandness, a box for everything except the reason. The kind of document that could pass a lie detector because it has never once been asked to say anything at all. It feels nothing as it slides onto the next pile. It was built not to. The Catherine Gibbs School trains women to the highest clerical standard in the country. Shorthand, correspondence, deportment, the correct angle of the telephone receiver. Completion of the program is, in professional terms, a credential. It says you can do the work at a level that most offices will never need to test. What it does not guarantee is access to the offices the credential was designed to open. The doors Gibbs prepares you for are not the doors that open for everyone who passes through Gibbs. Meanwhile, the typing pool is its own geography. At Metropolitan Life and at the larger insurance companies and banks, the pool is where clerical work happens in volume. 40, 50 women in a room together, each machine going at once, the whole floor sustaining roughly the noise of a busy restaurant, sustained for years. It is the entry point. For white secretaries, the pool is where you start. For most black women who manage to get hired at all, it is where you stay. The desk doesn't move. The notation at the bottom of the letter, JFH, MS, stays someone else's initials, always. The Women's Bureau tracks the gap in 1955 and again in 1957. A New York secretary earning $65 a week does work a male assistant is paid $85 to $95 for. Start lower than 65, because that is where you would start, and the gap stops being a statistic and becomes the number on your own pay envelope. Nobody in the personnel office is required to say that number aloud, and nobody volunteers. A woman named Loretta, precise, fast, and entirely unpromoted, works the typing pool at a midtown Manhattan firm in 1953, 6 rows from the window. She types 45 letters an hour. She has done so for 3 years. The woman, 2 rows over, hired 8 months ago, has already moved to a private desk. Loretta adjusts her chair by the same 1/4 inch. She adjusts it every morning and returns to the next letter. The chair does not comment. It has learned not to. No federal law requires that anyone explain the gap. The Civil Rights Act doesn't exist yet. That's 1964. Sexual harassment has no legal definition for another decade after that. The personnel form has no box for what actually happened in the room. The box it does have says the position was filled. Someone checks it. The folder goes back in the drawer, and the drawer closes the way it always does. The National Secretaries Association, founded in 1942, tops 23,000 members by 1952. It runs a certified professional secretary exam with roughly 150 hours of study required and a 60% pass rate, which is basically the bar exam, except the reward is permission to make someone else's coffee. The membership is, by the standards of the decade, not especially diverse. The organization is building a professional identity for secretarial work at precisely the moment when the profession's most basic opportunity, the job itself, remains closed to a significant portion of the women doing clerical work in America. The CPS credential and the closed door exist in the same decade, in the same cities, sometimes in the same buildings. You decide to prove, on paper, that you are good at this, and there is now an exam for exactly that. The professional association, founded in the previous decade and already past 23,000 members, administers a certified professional secretary test covering secretarial skill, business knowledge, and professional conduct. Preparing for it takes the equivalent of roughly 150 hours of study, and in its early years only about 3 in 5 who sit it pass. You study at the kitchen table after a full day at the desk, because the credential is one of the few things in this world that is yours and not his. The exam has 6 parts: business law, accounting, economics, secretarial skills, human relations, office administration. This is not a typing test you blow through in 20 minutes. This is closer to the bar exam, except that passing it earns you permission to keep making someone else's coffee at the same wage you were already making. The certificate arrives in an envelope. You put it in a drawer. You bring it out when you need to remember what you know. The National Secretaries Association is doing more here than administering a test. It launched Secretaries' Day in 1952, one Wednesday every April, officially set aside to recognize professional secretaries, which in practice means your boss hands you a card and possibly carnations, and then asks you to file something. The carnations are from a florist his secretary called. You know this because you are his secretary and you made the call. The card is signed in his handwriting. That part, at least, is genuine. Margaret Purcell, a member of the Detroit chapter, keeps a running log of what she studies and when. She marks off sections the way another person might mark off a grocery list, brisk, businesslike, and without ceremony. Human relations, done. Office administration, done. She sharpens her pencil each evening before she opens the book, because the pencil matters to her even though nobody will see it. The exam doesn't care about the pencil. Margaret does. The exam itself runs on a Saturday, in a rented room that smells of floor wax and other people's nerves. A proctor named Missus Ainsley walks the aisles in flat shoes that announce nothing, collecting nothing, watching everything. You answer questions on business law, on filing systems, on the correct handling of a confidential memo, on the etiquette of a transferred call. You finish with 4 minutes to spare and check your work twice anyway, because checking your work twice is the entire reason you are good enough to be sitting in this room at all. Your employer didn't ask you to take this. In most offices, the credential changes nothing on the pay stub. The Women's Bureau documented the pay difference in 1955 and again in 1957, and no report has a line item for certificates. No raise is attached to the certificate, and no report has a line item for it. The certificate sits in the drawer either way, and the drawer has never once renegotiated a salary. And yet the exam keeps filling. The pass rate climbs slowly through the decade. You sit for it in the evening, at the kitchen table, under a lamp that hums slightly. You're building something the office didn't build for you, and won't necessarily recognize when you show it. The certificate goes in the drawer next to the spare stockings and the tin of erasers, accurate where the official record isn't. The drawer closes. The lamp stays on a little longer. Tomorrow, the second ring still needs answering by the second ring. You glance at your hands before the workday begins, because even your fingernails fall under review. There is an acceptable shade of nail polish and an unacceptable one, and the boundary shifts depending on who is doing the looking. Like the perfume, like the foundation, like the precise angle at which you are expected to hold a telephone receiver, the rule is real but unwritten, enforced not by a posted notice but by a supervisor's passing comment. You learn the acceptable range the way you learn everything here, by watching what gets remarked upon and quietly steering away from it. Your hands are part of the office's appearance now. The polish itself is a small bottle of Revlon you keep in the desk drawer for emergencies, because a chip discovered at 11 is a problem you are expected to solve quietly by noon. You apply a fresh coat in the washroom with the door propped, blowing on each nail like a child and praying no one needs the telephone for the next 4 minutes. The telephone receiver angle exists. Someone decided on it. The receiver is to be held close but not pressed, held at an angle that keeps your voice clear and your expression visible, which matters even on a phone call, apparently, because several etiquette manuals from this period treat your facial arrangement as a professional variable. You already know the rest of the telephone catechism by heart: second ring, no hold past 90 seconds, never hang up first, and you perform it without thinking, the way you perform everything here. The nail polish rule sits inside this same logic. There are, by the unwritten consensus of the floor, exactly 3 acceptable shades for a Tuesday, and nobody will tell you which until you have worn the wrong one. Not theatrical, not distracting. The correct shade is modest, muted, and entirely unmemorable, something between nude and confident, closer to the colour of a Tuesday than the colour of a Friday. Macy's Career Girl section carried the correct shades, if you weren't sure, right next to the correct blouses and the correct handbags. Joan Kramer, a filing clerk on the 14th floor, finds out in March of 1955 that coral is acceptable because nobody mentions it. She finds out that red is not because somebody mentions it by Wednesday. She goes back to the pale pink. The pale pink has never once been mentioned. That is the entire system. None of these rules is posted anywhere. The steel-case desk in front of you is deliberately smaller than your boss's because that too is part of the same unwritten map, and the spatial hierarchy, it turns out, has opinions about everything, right down to the colour on your nails. You learn all of it the same way Joan learns the nail polish rule, by watching the air around other women for signs of weather. A comment from a supervisor lands like a small pressure system moving through the office. You adjust, you recalibrate, you put the coral back in the drawer and reach for the pale pink without being asked, because being asked is already the thing you are trying to avoid. Your hands rest on the keyboard. The nail polish is correct today. The telephone is within reach. By the second ring, you'll answer, and your voice will carry exactly the level of warmth that suggests competence without threatening anyone. Once a year, the office decides to recognize you, and the recognition arrives with a sponsor attached. The professional association established a day in your honor in the early part of the decade, observed in late April, and a corporation that happens to manufacture dictation equipment becomes one of its primary backers. So the appreciation comes bundled with a product demonstration, gratitude, and advertising in the same afternoon. You receive whatever the office has decided is appropriate: a card, perhaps flowers, perhaps a small luncheon, and then the day ends and the percolator still needs filling tomorrow at the usual time. The National Secretaries Association has been around since 1942, and by 1952 it clears 23,000 members. That same year it creates Secretary's Day, which is generous of them. The day lands in the last week of April. The Dictaphone Corporation gets involved early, which means the celebration of your labour sometimes includes a demonstration of equipment designed to eventually reduce the need for your labour. It's a very efficient arrangement. There's also a credential they build. The Certified Professional Secretary exam launches in 1951. It takes roughly 150 hours of preparation. The pass rate sits around 60%. You study administrative law, economics, accounting, office procedures, and human relations. You pass it and you are a CPS, which is an impressive set of initials that entitles you to keep doing what you were already doing, now with documentation. It's basically the bar exam, except the reward is permission to make someone else's coffee with slightly more professional legitimacy. The exam costs money. The preparation costs time. The time comes from evenings and weekends because the weekdays are occupied with the actual job. Patricia Hull, a legal secretary at a midtown firm in 1954, studies her CPS materials at the kitchen table on Tuesday nights while her husband reads the paper 3 feet away. She takes the exam on a Saturday in November. She passes. On the following Monday, she's at her desk by 8:45, Mr. Calloway's coffee already sitting in its usual spot, cream and no sugar. Patricia has never needed telling twice. The luncheon, when your office provides one, lasts about an hour. Some offices do a card signed by the executive staff. Some do a small floral arrangement, usually carnations. The carnations are cheerful, inexpensive, and faintly apologetic, and they list slightly to the left by Thursday. A few offices in larger firms arrange a proper sit-down, which is the good version, and also the version where you are expected to express genuine gratitude for the recognition with the same face you use when accepting a cup of coffee that is slightly too cold to be enjoyable. Mr. Danforth presents your card at 11, in front of the others, with the slightly formal air of a man reading a proclamation he did not write. Inside, in his secretary's handwriting, which is to say your handwriting, it thanks you warmly for your dedication. You thank him for the card. Everyone returns to their desks. The whole exchange takes about 90 seconds, and is, by the standards of recognition available to you this year, genuinely quite nice. And then it's Wednesday, which is not Secretary's Day. Wednesday is the day the carbons need assembling, the quarterly correspondence needs filing, and Mr. Calloway needs someone to call the reservation at Le Pavillon moved back to 1:15 because his 11 o'clock ran long. You do this. You do not mention that yesterday there were carnations. The carnations are on the corner of the desk, still listing. They have no opinion about Wednesday. They are simply trying to stay upright, which is, when you think about it, a very relatable posture. You arrive at work in a pantsuit, and a few years earlier this sentence would have been unthinkable. The rules are loosening now, slowly and unevenly, pushed along by changing law and a shifting culture and a new crop of women who simply will not measure their skirts while seated. The famous secretarial school finally drops its mandatory hat and gloves requirement near the end of the decade. The marriage bar quietly collapses as companies discover they cannot afford to keep firing the women they need. The wage gap is slower to move, and the ceiling above your desk is slower still, but the gloves, at least, can stay in the drawer. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 is the formal moment, the one with a date attached. Title VII makes sex discrimination in hiring illegal, which sounds straightforward until you discover that enforcement is a separate project with a separate timeline and its own extensive opinion about how long these things take. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission receives roughly 8,000 complaints in its first year. The Commission refers to many of the sex discrimination filings as, quote, not appropriate for its resources. The drawer where you keep your rights has a sticking problem. What actually shifts first isn't the law, it's the numbers. By 1960, you're one of 2.3 million women doing this job, and companies that fire you the week after your wedding are starting to do the math. The labour pool is finite. The typing pool is not going to staff itself. So the marriage bar doesn't so much get abolished as it gets quietly embarrassed out of existence, department by department, firm by firm, each one pretending it was never really policy in the first place. Nobody sends a memo. The memo was always the problem. Meanwhile, downtown, a woman named Gloria Jimenez is breaking in a pair of wide-leg trousers in a 12th floor office on Madison Avenue and waiting to see if anyone says something. Her supervisor, a man named Forsyth who wears the same 3 ties on a rotation she has memorized, looks at her legs, looks at his coffee, and says nothing. Forsyth picks up his phone. This is, in its way, a revolution, small, carpeted, conducted in fluorescent light. But a revolution. The pantsuit itself arrives with the weight of a full institutional argument behind it. It's warm, it has pockets, it is comfortable, practical, and quietly insubordinate. It does not require you to keep your knees together at a precise angle while taking dictation at 90 words per minute. The skirt suit lobby, which was never an official lobby but absolutely had opinions, loses the argument not in a boardroom but in a fitting room at Macy's Career Girl section, which is still called the Career Girl section, which tells you something about the pace of change. The typewriter is being replaced, slowly at first and then with great commitment. The IBM Selectric arrives in 1961 with a spinning typeball and a self-correcting ribbon that handles errors without the small abrasive eraser, without the 4 carbon sheets, without the quiet 10 minutes of scraping that used to punctuate every bad draft. Bet Nesmith Graham's liquid paper, which she mixed from tempera paint in her Dallas kitchen and carried to the office in a nail polish bottle for years, is now a company with employees. Progress has a tendency to arrive in nail polish bottles. And the notation at the bottom of the letter, JFH, Mez, the boss's initials large, yours small, that stays. The coffee stays. The desk outside the door stays, still smaller than his, still in the same position it occupied the entire decade. Some of the rules loosen, some of them just stop being written down. The difference between those two things is larger than it sounds, and you know it, because you've been reading the fine print since your first morning at the switchboard. The fine print doesn't disappear, it just changes fonts. And that's the workday, finally over. You answered by the second ring, every time. You memorized how 4 different men took their coffee and never once wrote it down. You typed 60 words a minute with no more than 2 errors a page, and when you made the third, you scraped it out of 4 carbon layers by hand, one sheet at a time, like a very small and very underpaid archaeologist. You wore the flesh-toned hosiery without a run. You wore the closed-toe heels, no higher than 2.5 inches, not a millimetre more. You wore the gloves for the commute and took them off at the door, because the building had firm opinions about gloves after 9. You stood when he entered. You made the same phone call sound like good news 3 separate times before lunch. They were real, the women who did all of this, Edith with her dented tin of eraser shields, Vera pressing one finger flat against the desk for every rude caller and quietly calling it a census, Elsie filling a private notebook in the last 5 minutes of the day. They were precise and tired and genuinely funny, and they ran the place from a desk built deliberately smaller than the one they answered to. The record kept their initials in lowercase, down below the fold. It did not keep much else. Now the percolator is off. The cover is on the typewriter. The pink message slips are stacked in their tray, and the second line has finally, mercifully, stopped blinking. So tonight, be quietly glad for the small things they were never handed. A job that doesn't end the week you marry. A sick day you don't have to perform your way through. The delete key, your own name, in full size, at the top of your own work. Let your shoulders drop. Let your eyes close. Let the whole careful uniform slide off into the dark. Sleep well.